Okay, good morning, everyone. It's an honor for me to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Dr. Rajesh Tandon, speaking from New Delhi. Dr. Tandon is a well-known scholar and activist who has devoted many years of his career to different forms of community organizing and research. He is the founder and the president of the Participatory Research in Asia institution in New Delhi, and he is also co-director of the UNESCO Chair in Community-Based Research and Social Responsibility in Higher Education, based at the University of Victoria, as well as in his own institution, Priya, in New Delhi. This UNESCO chair supports North-South, South, and South-South partnerships that build on and enhance the emerging consensus in knowledge democracy. The many themes that Dr. Tandon will address this morning, I think of great interest to us here are some of the themes that are being dealt with throughout the conference. For instance, the issue of authoritarian democracies and what he's called the lockdown citizens' actions, the actions of lockdown citizens, local organizing, community organizing in the face of crises, the consequences of the relegation of human contact to online contact, something that is embodied by this particular conference, and something that I was very interested to know more about is what he calls mother tongue scholarship and organic intellectuals. This, I think, is something of particular interest to us here. So without much further introduction, I will ask Dr. Tandon to deliver his talk, whose title is Reimagining Futures Where All Lives Matter, Participatory Democracy in the Post-Pandemic Era. You have about 45 minutes, Dr. Tandon, and also for the audience, there will be no discussion after this keynote. We will then move directly to the next session. Please go ahead.
Namaskar. Salam alaikum. Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Professor Lisa and Professor Mudar. Professor Lisa has given a very interesting introduction with selected issues. First of all, I am really honored to be able to interact with you and share with you my experience and perspectives in this very important 26th annual conference, Muwatin conference. I hope that there will come a time sooner than later when we can meet each other, hug each other, and continue our conversation. As I speak to you this afternoon, I can tell you that there are 6 million infected cases of coronavirus in India, and nearly 92,000 fatalities have occurred. In the eyes of the researchers, epidemiological researchers, health researchers, both these figures are highly underreported. And the reason it is so is because the nature of the virus has caught everybody off guard. It has caught our own governments off guard, but also our own scientists off guard. I really appreciate deeply the title of your 26th annual conference. When will the smile return to our world? It's a question that I think all the 8 billion citizens on earth are asking every day for last 6 months or more. I was inspired by the title of your conference to also make my presentation linked to the return of that smile. And I want to share with you what emotions went through as I was preparing to share my views with you this afternoon. Next slide, please. My first perspective is that eyes wide open. I think there is a Hollywood movie called Eyes Wide Shut. There was a lot of time, for decades, our eyes were wide shut, perhaps, at least for the last 30 years, when we all thought that the new liberal economic model is going to take us to new heights. And the rest of us, countries like ours in Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, India, we were all trying to follow that model. And now our eyes are wide open. They are open to what has happened in the Western capitalist systems over the last 6 months. High infection rate, high fatality rate. US continues to face that. It has happened in UK, in Italy, in France, in Spain. And suddenly, the model that we were all chasing seemed to be not so attractive. Countries like ours had high infection rate, continue to increase, but something different has happened in many of our countries where fatality rates have not been that high. The second aspect on which our eyes wide open is that our infrastructure of public services was thoroughly exposed, starting with health services. And not only that exposed in our countries, but exposed in New York, exposed in Los Angeles, exposed in Barcelona, exposed in Milan, in London. So we had taken for granted basic public services in education, in health, in water, in sanitation. Our eyes have been once again opened on this. I want to come back to this question of what has happened to migrants. You see some of the pictures, you may have read about what was happening in countries like India, but we are not unique. In India, nearly 20 million migrant workers were suddenly uprooted as the lockdown was declared in less than 4 hours' notice. They were short-term migrants who came for agriculture harvesting season. They were regular migrants who came to work in construction, in domestic chores, in small businesses, as street vendors. And they came to earn a livelihood because where they came from could not sustain. They were all around the middle class. They were all around our households. The maids, the service providers, the drivers, the vendors, the plumbers, the electricians, the food suppliers. They were all around us, but we didn't notice them. And suddenly, with the lockdown, migrants began to be visible, and migrants began to be ill-treated. Their employers threw them away, did not give them wages for the month of March, forget April. They were asked to vacate their temporary housing, rental housing. They had no place to go. And with the shutdown of railways and public transportation system, millions of them began to walk to go back to their villages. And as they were walking, police and security agencies tried to stop them across the borders of the states. This has happened also to internationally. We have come across examples from Malaysia, from Indonesia, from Korea, where migrant workers from Bangladesh, from India, from Nepal were suddenly thrown out of livelihood, out of home. And not only that, they began to starve, but also their dignity was stolen from them. In this 6 months of the lockdown period, the most authoritarian actions have been taken by what we have come to call electoral democracies. From Hong Kong to Philippines, to Singapore, to India, Russia, Turkey, UK, Italy, US, Brazil. These countries and their stories have been on international media. But we don't hear stories from other countries. We don't hear from Cambodia. We don't hear from Laos. We don't hear from Myanmar. We don't hear from South Africa. We don't hear from many of your countries in the Arab region as well. But the notion that long-standing electoral democracies, that of the Western Europe and that of countries like India, second largest population, largest democracy, nearly 850 million voters cast their vote in just about a year ago in national elections. But it is this democracy which has increasingly become authoritarian and centralized, and a small coterie of 4 or 5 people, that's all, 4 or 5 people, take all decisions. They have used the period of lockdown to arrest dissenters whose crime was committed apparently 3, 4, 5 years ago. They have used this period to change significantly workers' rights and labor legislation. They have introduced new provisions to restrict the functioning of civil society. And they have begun to control not only the radio and television, but also social media. And as a result, citizens' own actions to support others were restricted. When there are numerous examples when civil society tried to support some starving families, or neighborhood went out to give food, police restricted them in the name of the virus, in the name of infection. And the tendencies which were already there, authoritarian tendencies in electoral democracy, they got a significant boost. And as a result, they are visible from their actions today. Next, please. While our eyes were opening to some of the realities, I must say that I have enjoyed 4 months of lockdown and being at home. I'm sure many of us have enjoyed that too. What was music to my ears? The first music was that local community leaders, local youth, local women of self-help groups, of women's movement, of adolescent girls, they rose to the occasion because they were not able to get any instructions or any information from centralized government circulars. Most of those circulars were in English. The circulars were on internet, and the circulars were going out and changing every few hours. So if you even try to follow the circulars, you would be confused and don't know what to do. So they used their local wisdom and they began to organize themselves. There are numerous stories, and I'm sure there are stories in your part of the world as well, where they collected food, they collected water, they helped each other. There are stories about how uh, migrants returning to the village were supported in a village-based quarantine in a school building, or and food was supplied to them. They were kept in comfort. Um, you know, so our experience has reinforced our faith in local leadership, local community action, even in the face of this pandemic, even in the face of this disaster for which nobody was prepared or nobody anticipated. The second interesting part of that music to the ears is how everybody, whether you are in the village or you are in New Delhi, began to uh, use your own local practices. You had to cook what you had. There was no supply of food uh, for 4 weeks in India. Everything was locked down. You got some help maybe from your neighbors. If you were in a village, you got help from other producers. And however, because they were pushed, everybody was pushed to rely on their own resources, their own culture, their own practices. They discovered new ways to use local food, nutritious food, and also return to the mutual support mechanism, which had traditionally been a part of many of our societies. Mutual solidarity, mutual help, you know, and part of it was related to stress busting. In the local areas, in many rural areas, small towns, uh, family action, community action helped to deal with the stress. The difficult part was those who were alone, who were either working in big cities or who had got stuck somewhere living alone, living in a paying guest arrangement or living in a hostel. But if you were with your family and your neighborhood, you actually got counseling. Uh, we played carom, cards, things we didn't do, watch films together, listen to music. We began to understand why I would listen to the music of the 60s and my children would listen to the music of the 90s and 20s. Um, so this this was a very positive reconnection within the family, within the neighborhood. I began to connect with a lot of my old friends with whom I had not spoken. Many of us have been cut off from our extended families because we became so urbanized. We became so so much chasing our profession, our work, um, that that we lost connections with even those with whom we used to play when we were in high school. A third part of the music to my ears is return to the austerity approach in lifestyle. I don't know about you all, but I have used only two pairs of trousers, mostly t-shirts, half pants, chappals, sandals, no shoes, no socks in last 6 months. And I open my cupboard and say, why the hell is this sitting there? Many of my young nephews and nieces and my colleagues in Priya um, were used to having at least one meal from outside every day. In this part of the world, momos and pasta is very popular these days. Well, you couldn't order momos, you couldn't order pasta. They began to enjoy uh, the gourd and the potatoes and the tomatoes cooked at home, which when their parents used to cook or their grandparents, they used to dismiss as tasteless. Now they discovered fresh taste in it. And to my great surprise, I discovered that many of these young people who were living way beyond their means, they were spending almost 110% of their monthly income, are now in 6 months saved a lot of money. And they realized that actually they didn't miss too much. They didn't miss too much. So this return to uh, minimized consumption practices. We were becoming an overconsumptive society. With as our economic standard improves, you consume more and more, and of course it has its health consequences. It has, there's an assumption that by increasing consumer spending, economy will get a boost. So you pump prime the demand for more products and services. Well, the macroeconomy slowed down, has even gone down, but people's lives are better in some ways. They have discovered new talent within themselves and their communities and friends. And lastly, music to hear is, of course, the clean water, the fresh air, the chirping birds. There were stories coming out that how people can view snow-covered mountains 200 kilometers away. Many of us were able to see stars in the night in Delhi. I could listen to birds near my apartment. And despite being one of the most polluted cities, one could enjoy walking out of the home in the park in Delhi and breathe fresh air again. So, in some ways, the pandemic has shown a mirror to us, a mirror which opened our eyes to all the inequalities, all the catastrophes, all the authoritarianism, all the exclusion that was happening. It just opened it up in front of us, but it's also opened up some of those small supportive practices which could actually help us reconnect with our ecology, reconnect with our community, reconnect with our families, and make us possibly what people are calling a new normal, make it possibly move towards a more balanced, way of relating with our ecosystem, our natural resources, our forests and trees. Um, let's see whether that is potential, that has the potential or not. Um, but 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 the music to the ears uh, was very much a part of the experience of last 6 months. Next slide, please. Well, we many people around the world know India as the giant in digital technology. Many of its digital companies are known worldwide. We have a very large, technically qualified human resource, which not only works in India but in throughout the Silicon Valley. Um, but all these companies and their market penetration was designed for markets of the West. 80 to 85% of the annual turnover of our top 10 IT companies comes from Europe and North America. So there is a disconnect. There is a large population. Less than 20% of the households in India are connected on internet. The 85% of the households are what I call single device household. They have either a small Nokia phone, the old style, not very smart, not as smart at all. And that one phone is shared in the household, typically by the male head of the household. There is a small, there's small bandwidth of middle class and upper middle class, which has two, three, four devices at home, a smartphone, two, three smartphones, a desktop, a laptop. But that's not the real world. And this I discovered is also true for many countries like Bangladesh, Malaysia, parts of Indonesia. It's not just India. And I'm sure it is also true in many parts of your region, in Africa, particularly sub Saharan Africa as well. So, in the course of the pandemic, everything is now being done digitally, online. We have online dating services, which we were there, but now online marriages, online cremations also. In my own family and among my friends, distant relatives, 7 or 8 deaths have taken place in the last 6 months. But online condolence meeting doesn't help you grieve unless you can hug your relatives, unless you can hold them in your hands. So this mania that is currently in vogue, governments are pushing this. Private sector is looking at it as the new line of expanding business. I'm told that Amazon is the only one which is hiring people. Rest are throwing them out of jobs. This is untenable and this is dangerous. Online cannot forever displace or replace human connection. The second problem that has become obvious, because now if you are looking for a job, you must try to go on a portal. Now, if you are a construction worker who went back home to your village and you are now thinking of coming back to Delhi region to find your job again, how do you connect on a portal? So you have a group of intermediaries who come in and say, we'll teach you how to connect to a portal. So we are moving towards a mindset where we are losing touch with our ability to analyze and solve problems. If we face a problem, we search for a tech app. And if we can't find a tech app, we can't solve the problem. Some people have 100, 200 apps on their smartphone. I have 8 or 9 of them and I get perpetually confused. Maybe because I am old. But I have not lost my capacity to analyze and solve problems. My worry is that the younger generation is being pushed to identify an app, not to understand a problem and how to solve it. As some of you know, my first degree is in electronics engineering. And then when I was studying Boolean algebra and I was studying binary logic, 0, 1. Yes, no. That's the essence of the new digital technology. Yes, no. And on social media, it is likes, that's it. But the real world is not binary, it's not yes and no. The real world is yes, no, and somewhat, if, whenever. The complexity of human experience cannot be taken down to yes and no, switch on, switch off. We must have the capacity to say yes and no. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. In some situations, yes, in other situations, no. But our young people and many of us who are now being pushed in this, the education system, I'm sure it's happening in your region. All kids from age 5 are learning online. What are they learning online? The parents are working on from home online. So if you have a 2-room house and 2 kids, there are 4 people who are trying to work online with one device with a somewhat disruptive bandwidth, which also costs hell of a lot of money these days as demand is increasing. As a result, as a result, we are pushing people to find solutions within a very narrow set of options defined by the tech app. And if it doesn't exist in that, then you don't have a choice. You can't create a choice. Finally, the social media, much has been said about it everywhere. I look at this as a anti-social. The media is anti-social because it is trying to reinforce some of our parochial tendencies, reinforce our narrow identities. You belong to this caste, you belong to this religion, you belong to this, this region. And these narrow identities are being reinforced by criticizing, undermining, and devaluing others. It is being done through a process of spreading a worldview, which is, some call it populist, some call it extreme nationalist, but it is a fragmenting and dissipating worldview. It is not an integrating and a coalescing worldview. And by propagating this worldview, both the capitalist class and the political class hope to perpetuate their hegemony over the long haul. And this is what would lead to a new false consciousness amongst our younger generation, amongst our people who are in their teens. Next slide, please. So once my eyes are wide open in the last 6 months to some of the very difficult questions, but I also hear some music in my ears to some warm, positive situations. And I feel that despite the value of online and technology, the warmth of the human touch must be sustained. I have been last 7, 8 weeks periodically going to Priya office and inviting others and attending 1 or 2 meetings. I'm happy to give people a hug. If I can't hug you, what's the big deal? So, how, in my view, the smiles on our faces can return? First of all, they're not going to return only in one part and not in another part. We are in it together. This is one challenge, whether you are $50,000 per capita income or $500 per capita income. It has affected everybody. So I want to suggest that one of the pillars of bringing back smiles on our faces is to reinforce what I call horizontal citizenship, which is based on solidarity and well-being. We seem to believe that our identity, our citizenship is defined by the state. We forget that the current conception of nation state is less than 250 years old. And for many of our societies, which were colonized and then over the last 70, 75 years have been so-called given independence, we inherited a state apparatus which did not germinate from our society and therefore is not accountable to our society. So citizenship creates norms of responsibility and obligation with each other. Within the household, within extended kinship, neighborhoods, communities. We have reached a stage where instead of talking to our neighbors to solve a problem of parking or problem of garbage, we call the cops. We depend on the state. The state has entered our bedrooms and we can't find our identity unless it is defined by the state. And therefore, the state discriminates. State starts in electoral democracy, states start by saying you're all equal. But some are more equal than others. And because the systems of state apparatus only service a few and not everybody. So in this sense, electoral democracy doesn't work for all. The second point that I suggest we look for is we return to this question of local economy. Many people have worked on this asset-based local circular economy. Some economists are now talking about circular economy. Small is beautiful was talked about 40 years ago. What is meant by this? What is meant by this? Economists created this framework, which was economies of scale. So produce large, cost comes down. So one part of the world produces rice. And then it ships rice to other part of the world. At the cost of shipping, at the cost of pollution. It should be possible for 60-70% of our food security and other daily requirements to be met in less than 100 kilometers from where each community lives. The design of our mega cities are built on the principle of extraction from the countryside. This needs to change. The economists created a theory that you must specialize. And so somebody specializes in footwear, somebody specializes in food, somebody specializes in clothing, and then we ship each other. No. That's why everybody eats the same food, everybody wears the same dress, everybody wears the same shoes, everybody reads the same text. This monoculture that has come about is because we have tried to centralize globally economic production, and therefore consumption in your region and my region and African region looks the same. I want to return to the question of centrality of participatory democracy. Because of the euphoria of electoral democracy, we became voters. We have lost sight of being citizens. In the face of the economy, we are consumers. In the face of a welfare state, we are beneficiaries. And in the face of a electoral democracy, we are voters. We seem to have lost our own capacity to govern our own resources and relationships. Local governance of natural resources, of productive assets, will always be in the interest of local priorities, locally prioritized sustainable development goals. not UN proclaimed sustainable development goal. And it is because we have systematically dismantled local capacities and institutions, governance has become increasingly centralized. But we used to have ecologically, culturally determined models of governance which were not identical. The governance in a desert region was very different from the governance in a coastal region because the ecology was different, because the cultural practices were different. We need to return to devolved governance where participation, direct participation, is at the core. I am not saying we dismantle the nation state. No, that's not the purpose. But nation state and a centralized economy and centralized politics has devoured local democracy, have consumed local choices, local models, local diversity. We need to rebalance it because pandemic has shown solutions are local, leadership is local, choices are being made locally. Finally, how will this happen? As Lisa said, I believe that we have adopted blindly, and I blame your region and my region in particular, the European concept of science and knowledge. Knowledge in our societies was produced, shared, used to build our civilizations. There are examples of libraries of local knowledge in your region and my region going back 2000 years, 1800 years. The modern knowledge system did not begin in 14th century Europe, which is what everybody teaches and proclaims. Neither modern knowledge system began in 3 European languages. No. So in our view, in our work we are doing, and I think the pandemic has given great reinforcement to our work, that multiple types of knowledge systems must come together. The knowledge of our indigenous people, the tribal communities, the women's knowledge, my grandmother's knowledge is as critical as the knowledge of a professor in the best science institute in India. And in fact, in some ways, my grandmother's knowledge and the local farmer, indigenous farmers' knowledge is helping them survive better than that professor of science who is helpless, doesn't know how to eat, what to do. So knowledge democracy is essential for building that new normal or build back better or whatever is the appropriate slogan. It implies understanding different knowledge cultures. And in order to understand different knowledge cultures, we must understand different language cultures. Because local concepts, local theories are expressed in local languages. They are not expressed in 3 European languages. The one I am using right now is not my mother tongue. What I understand from any of these concepts, participation, locality, solution, these are concepts in my mother tongue too. But they mean differently. They don't mean the same. Because my mother tongue and your mother tongue and other people's mother tongue produces knowledge and frameworks which are distinct and appropriate for the context in which that knowledge was created. By killing those knowledge systems, we are killing the diversity. By killing languages, we are killing knowledge systems, and we are killing the diversity of knowledge democracy. Gramsci talked about organic intellectuals. Because we are speaking in English and to an academic audience, I must always bring reference to some other more profound academic like Gramsci. But fact of the matter is, you know it and I know it, that our mother tongue scholars have excellent knowledge about ecology, agriculture, livestock, water harvesting, healthcare, organic farming, etc. Thank you very much. I look forward to meeting you all one day together. Thank you for this opportunity. Inshallah, shukran.
Thank you, Rajesh, for a most stimulating talk about the opportunities and the challenges presented by the pandemic. And I think that much of what you said resonates very strongly here in Palestine, particularly as compounded by our colonial reality as well. So thank you for really very stimulating talk. I'm sorry that there's no opportunity to engage our audience with you, but this is how it's set up. So welcome again, and we hope to be able to receive you here on the ground in person and to touch you. Okay, right. Thank you. Okay. Okay.
وإذا الآن سنبدأ so shall we start with the second session? Okay. Dr. Mustafa is still logging in. Yes, I received this message that he's still logging in. Maybe he's here. Maybe he's here. Let's check. Let's check. I welcome you in the second session, and I will move to Arabic in this session. So this session, in this session we have two speakers, Dr. Raef Zreik and Dr. Mustapha Kamel As-Sayed. We will start with Dr. Raef Zreik. And I would like, in brief, to present Dr. Raef Zreik. Dr. Raef, I think he has a strong presence he's in many contributions, academic and others, and he's an activist in many studies and philosophical studies and other issues. And let's wait for Dr. Mustapha to present him as well. The first lecture will be for Dr. Raef about where he says that these books reaching to totalitarian. This book, when is being published after it's ran out of libraries during Trump. So he asks a question. Dr. Raef asks a question: is there something that we learn from this? And what are the horizons for the transformations of the new emerging populism to a totalitarian trend? This is a hot issue that it's about the movements, personalities, many populist trends and movements. Dr. Raef, I will ask you please to start. You have 20 to 25 minutes, and then it will be followed by discussion after we listen to Dr. Mustapha. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for the organizers and Joyce for giving me this chance to speak on this important subject. As a matter of fact, I've been teaching event for years, but the objective is not to speak of Arendt, but to the writings of Arendt, and if we have anything to learn. And humbly to did or can Arendt provide us with a research agenda at least, or the basic terminology that can assist us in research around the issue of populism. So it is an attempt to think of populism taking into consideration what Arendt wrote, and an attempt to understand some paradoxes with Arendt, and through that, and understand the paradoxes related to liberal democracy and its relation to populism. That is, maybe Arendt is a model for some problems that are brought with the liberal democratic thought, or some and its relation with populism, and the relation of both with wider contexts such as that of capitalism, the national state, and imperialism. In this context, in particularly, Arendt can have some important contributions to take into consideration. Now, there are different definitions for populism. I tried to collect this. I did that myself to see some literature, what is meant by populism. It is a mixture of different quotes and sayings, different writers who agree on all components. Some of them focus on some of them. I selected 5 components of populism that I believe there is some agreement around them. People being the source of powers and legitimacy. And second, when we speak about people, we speak about an ethnically or nationally clean, homogeneous group. Third, speak about hostility of the elite, considering that they are corrupt and has led down the representative democracy project. And fourth, the populist leadership such as Trump, their allegation that they are the sole representative of the nation. And fifth, populism comes in different forms, in its negative form, especially in its right-wing trend, because populism could be leftist. Now we are witnessing right-wing leftists, but there is nothing in the term that can prevent or to make that exclusive to the right-wing. The right-wing populism, and it's even in its leftist form, but I'm not sure here, could be a representation of existing policies of questioning and rebalances, and based on a policy of belief and finding answers that should be clear and to the point, that promise with fast revolutionary solution. This is the atmosphere that I want to speak about populism. I don't want to define it, but to get into the atmosphere of what we mean by populism. Even language-wise, there are some questions that are asked from the etymology, that populism and people are from the same source. And even democracy and demos are from the same source. And if populism if populism considers people as the source of all legitimacies, then Hobbes, Modena, and Rossa, and Tocqueville until this day, they believe that people away from God or the king are the source of legitimacy and power. So this brings the question if populism is a tragic road accident for the liberal, the current, the modern democratic thought, or if it represents a continuation, natural one, which is the model that started for 200 to 150 years, which said that totalitarianism as if this put us in the so the populism, we can look at it as something that is not limited to a traffic accident or road accident, but it is indicative to continuation of relation between what happened in modernity and until this day. This is a question. Alan discussed that is, to what extent it is a continuation or disconnectivity into modernity. I think this question is still valid, and we can deal with it to enrich the research agenda by putting this question. That is, to what extent does this elite is considered as something that is sudden, or is it indigenous or original? In Arendt thought, we can find some paradoxes that indicate to some general tensions with other scholars, not only Arendt, but in Arendt, I'll try to assess these ideas to flow. And Arendt, in different forms, I like to read Arendt because it stimulates thought. It doesn't have a system, and each time she contradicts herself. But there is a revival for Arendt. Which is related to the decline of Marxism and the challenge to the economic world system and the liberal democracy in its political form. So it was, until that moment, it was a side or secondary dialogue within the Western system, that is the Republican and liberal democracy. This discussion that used to be secondary, as long as there was that major discussion between different socialist and Marxist thought and a capitalist system and its liberal democracy. It was something sidelined, but with the decline of the Marxist socialist thought, this secondary thought becomes as if it presents an alternative for the liberal democracy. And so this ascension to Arendt is explained by some former leftist thoughts who found in Arendt something that gives them a position in facing the current liberal democracy or capitalism without returning to some Marxist thoughts that are outdated. And there is a celebration by Arendt with many areas, different areas with the political activism. Nonetheless, Arendt has an ongoing fear from political participation and from the public entering politics. So it represents this form that calls for democracy and is afraid from demos and celebrates political participation, nonetheless is afraid of that this political participation can lead to the bringing down all the islands that protect the individual against the group, which is some spoke publicly of this, such as John Stuart Mill, and took a liberal position before democratic. He was a liberal. Arendt tried that is to hold democracy the burden of revolutionary thought. And I think she was even before the radical left, from the school of Raef, and Wendy Brown, and others, who backed somehow on Marxism. They didn't want to settle in a purely liberal world, so democracy was the rich area that can provide them with radical thought without being committed to some substantial thought or some metaphysical thought. I will try to present 3 points that show Arendt's interest in democracy. After that, I will show how she takes her left with her right. First of all, Arendt, in her definition to freedom, is a positive definition that is connected to action and political action. That man cannot feel free unless they do political action. This connection shows the importance of participatory action, which is a thought that is different from the traditional liberal thought that is as freedom originated. And so it separates between freedom and liberty. Freedom happens when we act. So, second, her thought of politics in a world that has its own rules, and her interest in the concept of plurality, التعددية. Basically, it's just plurality. But fourth, what was most kept in our mind as celebration of democracy and politics, and the term citizenship is her harsh criticism to Plato's project and the model of cave, the utopian and following Socrates' trial, who paid the price for democracy because the majority believed that he was criminal. And so Plato was the first who noticed this danger in the view of the majority. So the idea of cave, that where the philosopher goes out and sees the light is a dangerous model because for Arendt, it shows that the philosopher is interested in fact, he sees the fact and light while they are alone. Arendt compares between this model of this mentality that is based on mind but not dialogue, on the individual, not the group, and on the fact but not the view. In comparison, we have Socrates who moves between the people, and first and foremost, he's a citizen before being a philosopher, and is based on ongoing dialogue and on the view but not the fact, because the fact takes the points of view and regulates politics, and its totalitarian view oppresses politics. I think this juxtaposition, which is shows a lot in her writing. And while speaking on participatory democracy in North America, but this is half of the story. The other half is that Arendt say some summarized views. She speaks about democracy and demos, which is something positive when she uses the term people. But for her, most of the people are not people. She speaks about macros and the masses. These are not people for her, so they don't have the right to politics. In her book, Origins of Totalitarianism, because Origins of Totalitarianism summarizes her experience for the entry of the people to politics, which is reserved to that. She believes that the masses and the tribe cannot participate in politics. And this is clearly represented in her speaking about the French Revolution and the inability of the French Revolution to lead to safe areas of freedom and constitutional system. Because the French and French Revolution were busy with the basic economic and physical things. However, for her, politics should be based on principles and ideals, but not to bring your things to the politics. If you want to bring your things to the politics, the things you need to bring with them, they bring with them because they are governed with a cultural principle, coerced dictation. And so I believe Arendt is a model for this variation between the wish to have an open-ended process democracy, but from the back door, it brings whatever she wants from these people to produce. And this is an ongoing paradox for most of the organizers for democracy who want to hold democracy things that are heavier than its thought one, that tries to bring from the back door things based on the shape, not the content. Even Marxist ideas that believe that the shape cannot give us the content. We cannot speak the content. So this controversy has always been around. And has been with all scholars who speak about this. And now I'm left with 3 points with the subject that I believe Arendt, still there is this contemporary situation for Arendt and some of her basic ideas. First of all, in her analysis to the totalitarian regimes or systems, Arendt starts from a far point, the 19th century, and describes the ascension of totalitarianism. There's a book, Totalitarianism, but before that, there are 2 books, in fact, about non-Semitism and imperialism, both of which, in her view, are product of imperialism. There is a certain sequence, and she concludes that free from totalitarian systems is still existing because this sequence of joining the capitalism, producing superfluous people, meets with another regime of superfluous people that are not included in the political regime, which is the identity-based regime. Even the citizenship, which is a unionist project, but always excludes and establishes borders between citizens and non-citizens. Identity, the citizenship, removes borders internally, but establishes borders between this identity and other identity. And so it produces superfluous people. And this has always been around. So when this dynamism turns into, from just a populist project into a totalitarian project, is an open-ended question. I don't think Arendt answered that completely. It is a question for us to try to answer. Itana Baribar, for instance, finds tracing that all the nationalist projects that end or with a declaration of independence, this founding point has always been connected with disposition and violence, rejecting others from America, Israel, you name it. There is a point of force that keeps this identity-based thought existing and is not really based on democracy as an open process of, no. The moment of birth for democracy, it is a moment of a closure, not openness. It's a moment of decision, not a discussion. A moment that includes people but by definition, it suffocates the other and is based on the policies of identity. I believe here we need to develop something. What happened with this constellation? It is connecting with imperialism and how are these things are connected with the populism. 2 points for Arendt, then I'll try to improvise something. I'll say something about Arendt, but it is certain but it's connected different areas. But before I end with my conclusion, first of all, her diagnosis to the quality of public or individuals exposed to joining totalitarian movements aren't focused a lot on loneliness, on this loneliness and the contemporary society that creates some people who lack the context and significance and prefer to regain this significance even in unreal way through integrating into a homogeneous complete project that gives different answers, even if not real. This is the question: how to read Arendt's analysis of alienation of loneliness, considering that totalitarianism is a tilted definition of or a form answer to this situation. And this usually happens in a coalition between different forms of elites that abuse the situation. This is another open question. What happened with this case of disorder 50 years or 70 years after Arendt, with the media, with the Facebook, telephones? Did this disorder increase or not? This is a point. Two last points related to Arendt, which is the fact and propaganda. The totalitarian movements that try to turn every statement of fact into a statement of purpose. That is, there is nothing outside politics. In politics, there are friends and foes. But this is the content. But you cannot say anything else unless you say if it's good or bad for us. So the issue is not that the totalitarian regimes are interested in lying, but there is more to it. We come to a point we become unable to differentiate between lie and fact, because the world there stops existing this way. It is more of a political world, and who's with the people and who's not. I believe this is part of the things that deserve development, especially that in a world where the actual and virtual are mixing together. I end with few things related to my understanding to connecting different issues related to populism and capitalism and nationalism. And this is through my analysis to what's happening in Israel and the increase in populism and the closed ethnicity and ethnic identity. In a neoliberal world, Israel in the 1990s, there was a development in Israel where the political liberalism increased and coupled with economic liberalism. This liberalization of politics and economics and separation from the society and giving more freedoms of politics was coupled with increase in the position and defense of individual ownership in defense and moving to liberalizing economy. Now, since 15 years, the economic liberalism increased and deepened with new liberal economic policies. And the political liberalism declined. Usually they are together. Spain was this way. And we are witnessing an increase in the religious, ethnic closed speech in Israel. And the recent Israel nationality law is a form of realization for this increase or ascension to this nationalist ethnic speech. What do I understand with this? One moment only. I'm finishing one minute. With the start of capitalism, there were interests for the elite to have nationalist projects. Nationalisms are born from the nationalist movement. That is, they developed this culture in order to build a joint market because of interest of having this joint market. Because I believe that in the absence of having social solidarity between the community members, the crushed groups are the ones who are interested in nationalist groups. If it was imposed by the elite, now it is the downtrodden groups are the ones who will be looking for that and trying to produce a solidarity in the symbolic work by placing borders or restrictions on the nationalist groups because they believe nationalism is their safe haven for their interests, if not the economic, but at least the symbolic ones. In the absence of social projects that ensure equality, the new liberalism and the populist groups will go hand in hand, and you will be mistaken if you feel there will be contradiction between the liberalism and the populism that goes for clothing. Finished.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry that I pressed you to finish, but anyway, no worries. I'm finished right on time. Okay, so you've given us a lot. You've given us a lot of. So I hope that in the discussion we've raised many questions. So I hope we'll be able to reply on these questions and inquiries, as in light of what you said, the revival of Arendt and openness to Arendt. So I believe there are many questions that have arose. We will not take longer. We will move on to Dr. Mustapha because we're a bit behind time. So we'll move now to Cairo. I believe Dr. Mustapha Kamel, are you in Cairo? Yes, I am. Welcome to Birzeit University platform, virtual platform. Dr. Mustapha Kamel is a political science instructor professor at Cairo University. He has many ratings in the political theory and other articles and political transformation in Arab countries. The paper of Dr. Mustapha today is titled The Crisis of Capitalism under the Current situation around the world. He tries to define or to answer a defined question. Are there lessons learned from the modern history to encounter the capitalism crisis, or is it a special, different crisis that will continue in the foreseen future? And how can the different capital systems will contribute in the sustainability of this critical system? So these are big questions, and we'd like to ask you, Dr. Mustapha, within 20 to 25 minutes to reply to this. Thank you very much. And I know I'm very happy to tell you that I'm very happy in this conference that is organized by Birzeit University. I really appreciate all the efforts and the colleagues, and my strong solidarity with the Palestinian people in this very critical stage that Palestinian people are going through, and where the Arab people are going through. My topic today is about the crisis of capitalist systems in the Arab world. I would like to summarize it in some few points. The type of crisis that's now going through is not only a new one, it's a structural one. And this crisis, it's a structural crisis stemmed of the basis that the capital system was erupted on during the past period. It cannot continue onwards. However, the ways to get out of this crisis are difficult. Accordingly, the result or the consequence is that it will go on, and the burden of encountering it will lay on the political dimension and social system in the capital system. This crisis has political and internal consequences, and it has also economic and consequences, social and economic consequences on the global south countries. Again, before I confirm, I would like to confirm that the capital system has known many crises. Its ideology and the economic cycles it's part of the analysis. Yeah, I know. I always feel this is my problem, and I always forget about it. It's a challenge. Okay. So the first point is about the nature of this crisis. Is this crisis a crisis? It's just a crisis that have just come up, or what is we facing is just a shrinkage, or is it just a recession, or which is identified by economists? It's the recession of the growth rate of half a year or 2/4 of a year. It's so it's recessing. The growth is recessing. That's what we call recession. However, the expansion is to continue to expand the growth, the retreat in this recession for more than 1 decade. For sure, the crisis has been acknowledged by the crisis history, all the capital crisis, and it's been filled with crisis. And this is part of the work of the capital system, because the crisis leads to getting out of the producers and to having less quality projects. So if it's a structural crisis, this will lead to the absence of these of the structure. If it's structural, then it will lead to the emergence of new dominant forces on the capital economy. The nature of this crisis, I feel it is not just a spontaneous crisis, which means that this crisis have accompanied or was in line with the simultaneous with the COVID-19 pandemic. So the economic capitalism will never go back to its roots. So there are many rules that we need to think of. The freedom of trade. This is a base rule for the economic system, the capital economic system, especially after the World War II. And the emergence of new movements and parties that will promote free trade, and like the International Monetary Fund and others, and then the World Trade Union. So the free trade is a key principle. And this is designed by and adopted by the biggest countries of the world, like the US. They protect this, and like China, who has exceeded recently the capital market. So when this pandemic ends, we will never go back to the free trade, because free trade was supported by the US and Britain. Britain is well known historically that it always supported the free trade principle. Then it was followed by the US. So Britain and the US always promoted for the free trade to serve their own interests. Britain was the first industrial country, and its best interest were to market its products worldwide. U.S. also still has the biggest economy in the world, so it's concerned to open markets around the world. We don't know, but there are many comparatives in this regard. And for a number of systems, financial systems around the world. So the Trump's administration in the US, there are many failures. It faced many failures, and it imposed taxes and customs on and tariffs on countries like Brazil and Latin American countries. Even Egypt was hit by this policy that is called on by the US. So it's an escape from the political situation that will not lead to free trade, and this is based on the current capital system. Globalization was one of the ways to escape for the capital system from being held accountable, which means it's at the same time the consumption will not grow in the rate that will align the increase in production. Therefore, globalization has opened a path for this through decreasing the expenditure of production by transforming some of these processes to the markets that seem to be cheap labor, or because globalization has opened markets to export products, consumption products, or globalization has opened the floor to invest in countries where investment is high and is not costly. So free trade is not really the base that it is, and we also witness now retreat from globalization. It is seen now in the politics of the U.S. and how Britain has the Brexit that happened in order to intensify globalization within the EU countries. And the fear to getting out of the EU on the account of other poor countries. So the idea is that globalization, it proved to be a risk on the ability to be able to encounter a health crisis because of the production network, global product networks and supply chain, and so some components in pharmaceuticals, in healthcare, some medicines are being produced outside these capital countries. When COVID-19 emerged, these countries became unable or incapable to provide the masks, some medications, because these are being produced in China or in Southeast Asian countries. So it's not only related to policies to reject globalization by the US, but it's also in crisis time, it's proved that globalization can be an impediment in enabling some countries to encounter this crisis. The third dimension that I've also mentioned is to the retreat or recession of the economic globalization. Globalization will never end, but retreat of economic globalization was hit, and it came to a catastrophic situation where the many, because of the consequences of COVID-19 and then the distribution of work on the world level. There's a review on how work is being distributed and how it's being done, and so this is, for instance, the display networks. We need these marketing and display networks to be shared by the big countries. And the production is being distributed where some products are being located in or have been located in East Asia, where, for instance, so the components that of production that's been done in Southeast Asia or East Asia countries are now being produced in Mexico. Same goes for European countries who are somehow prefer to transfer these production units to maybe to somewhere in Europe or North African countries. So this will lead to a change in the global distribution. Then the international or the universal role that is living under this global capital system, which calls to mitigate the role of these countries, not only in production, also in providing services, educational, health services, and even and it was proved that that a country assumes other roles than its original role will encounter crisis like the COVID-19 crisis. Therefore, there's a talk about that a country, a state playing a role in providing direct health services, like in the US. In the US, there's now incapability to provide health services or care services to COVID patients in hospitals and nurse, other clinics, and those who were able to combat this system or to be able to provide this health service to its patients, the ones who have free health services because they're able to direct the agricultural production. So it's how will a state reconsider its production, its new liberalism, its systems accordingly. So it's the free state, globalization, the distribution of action, and the role of a state. All these four components have been of the main characteristics of capitalism in the current times. And after when overcoming this crisis, we think we will go back to these characteristics. I would like to add to this the new liberal model, which is subject to many criticisms, which are as a result of the communists and or extremists. It comes also from citizens, and the example of this are the revolutions or the eruptions that took place in France. This in addition to this. This liberal model has reflected or revealed a big problem in the distribution, the justice in distribution. The French system has proved that the comparative or the variety in disparities in the fortunes aren't being distributed evenly, and this the revenue exceeds the production. So this leads to focusing on the fortunes to the rich, and which leads to political gaps and economic gaps, and it leads to the recession in the space of the market. So these are structural dimensions, and we can say here that this crisis that's over that the financial system or the capital system is overcoming. It's just spontaneous, and it could go back to the old system, but there will never be an old system except to have overcome these circumstances. Now, how can the capital system respond to this crisis? It's not a new crisis. There's a history for capitalism. Many divide the history of crisis. There's a history, there's a theory that's been addressed by the it's a long wave theory that's been addressed by historians and sociologists, and where it suggests that every 50 years the economy, the world economy and the capital economy passes through growth, and then speedy growth, and then recession again. So this cycle would happen every 50 years since 1988 until 2040 something, then so another 50 years, then 1997 until 1939, and then in 1939 until the late 70s. So it's the fourth wave. So all these waves can be paired, so it starts slow and then it becomes speedy and then it goes down, and then there's the recession and then the deflation. And there are many explanations for this long wave theory, and actually it has also the political scientists have also agreed on this. Samuel Hunt talked about the third wave of democracy, and he elaborated about the long wave. So the capital economic world has gone out of this third wave, long third wave. And one of these elaborations is related to the eruption of new evolution of new sectors in economy. There are many explanations. One of them says that the explanation is relevant to speed expanded development. Some of them were related to the Napoleon Wars and others in Egyptian history. So the second wave was related to the increase in expenditure on railways, the growth of steel industries in the works of railways. The third wave, 1897, was related to the eruption. 1897 was related to the emergence of electricity and industries to do with electricity. And the fourth, and related also to the World War II, and then the expansion or development of consumption production markets that are sustainable, like cars and radios and so on. So there is another explanation which says that to get out of a certain wave and then getting into another wave is linked to the use, the levels of technology and scientific levels. This is related very much to the innovations, the scientific innovations and technological ones. So I want to focus here because actually there's a document that reflects an era that the world economy has faced. Accordingly, in the last phase of this long wave that is related to the decrease in the growth rate, there are, I would say that there are many scientific innovations, but they weren't implemented because of the deflation, and this gives a floor to raise the revenue by capitalism, and this will lead to that the global economy will get out of the recession and going into prosperity. This is an important point that reflects this current wave that we're talking about, that we're addressing. There's a talk about the fourth industrial revolution, means internet and the similar, and the artificial intelligence and the application of biological inventions with information innovations. So this is the core of the fourth industrial revolution, which represents it will lead to an increase of the revenues over the capital, and which will lead consequently to the increase in investment, and the world economy will become a new prosperity. This is one of the solutions, the proposed solutions. The other solutions, some of these solutions could be because globalization was a tool to get out of the economic crisis in the 70s and the 80s during the openness that happened around the world, especially when opening the market to China, and the reforms in China that were called by the president of China in 1879. This led to a big openness to China, to the Chinese market, and millions of people were looking to raising the consumption rate, and that was a big leverage to the world economy. So increasing more globalization is not now promoted. However, the hope is in this fourth industrial revolution. After getting out of this crisis, it's represented the increase in the world in expenditure, the fortune expenditure. Afterwards, there is a chance to increase expenditure in medications, in healthcare, and maybe in agriculture, and in the preparedness to for this new to welcome this new revolutionary industrial work. So this calls for the intervention of the state in order to raise the income to all classes, especially the poverty classes. There are many unemployment rates that are high now in many, that have increased in many countries. So it means the increase in the public expenditure can be a way out of this crisis. All these tools, all these suggested tools that have been tried by the capital system previously, seems it may be was impossible, or will also be accompanied by sacrifices. So going back to such policies means that the state needs to increase its expenditures, and every country now is facing a fiscal crisis of the capital states. So if these capital states are facing such a fiscal crisis, how can they ask to increase their expenditure? We know about the revival program that the EU has called for, or recovery program. It means that 50 billion euros have been borrowed by the banks, from the banks. So following such policies will lead to more of debt, to more debt to the states, and will increase their debt, and this and some others will face even bigger problems. In addition, the ideological resistance from some conservative sectors. There are strong sectors that reject to have this compromise, like the war that or the battle that Trump has attacked over some systems. So going to these systems will bring up, or will face resistance, because the capital government will be in debt, and then it will have to find new resources to finance these systems. Also, the new liberalism is still in a cradle, and it will be supported by businessmen who will reject to go back to these old policies. Increase of globalization, of course, is not a solution. These new policies are becoming the base. And especially that now the issue is about increase. Globalization means giving the chance to China to become the first economy throughout the world, and not only even in technological innovations, not only in production and industrial production. China seeks to transform its economy to become an economy that depends on, or capital intensive economy, and entering in them. So the main components for excellence are the ones that US have previously adopted, and this will mitigate the problems that the Chinese companies have faced when they opened in the US. So globalization could be a solution for this crisis. The scientific industrial revolution, the fourth, will lead to the increase in investment, in expenditure, and in labor related to this revolution. But this will be on the account of the traditional productions and industries. Therefore, it's not easy to get out of this crisis. Then what will happen next? My main conclusion is that the crisis will go on in this capital system, and we will live in this structural crisis of the capitalist system, and we will continue for this ongoing crisis that have hit the world. Thinkers presented some scenarios to get out of this crisis. The first of these scenarios that we believe that capitalism is one of the solution. Well, that's wrong. We're not. It's an economic system, political and social system, which means that capitalism means there's a distribution, where there are liberal capitalism. There's authoritative capitalism. The U.S. is an example for liberal capitalism, along with Britain. But on the other hand, there is China and Turkey, and maybe Iran also is on the way. Russia, if Russia also, so it's also another example. We hear about the Belarusian Russian companies that are, some of them are private companies. All these who are they own billions, Russian billions, who own a lot in Britain. Well, the Russian capitalism is an authoritative capitalism. So a model of is also. So it's not only the only model, there's the liberal capitalization. So if we talk about the future of capitalism, we know that it's the future of different systems of capitalism in the future. However, within the liberal capitalism, there is pluralism. There is it's different than the German, than the Scandinavian capitalism. So there's a variation of capitalism systems, and there's a disparity in the opportunities, the way in order how to deal with this crisis. We want to clear out that the capitalist states that depends on the democratic systems will act accordingly, and we mean that the Albania is a model of a social marketing globe. So the economy of the US, for instance, is a market of open market. Germany and Scandinavian countries are social. Can you please conclude, Dr. Mustafa? So in brief, so there is a variation, and there's a response to this crisis, and the variation in the capacity to handle this crisis. So one of the scenarios suggested is the variation of the capital systems. However, the second point, which I favor, is that this crisis is a structural one of the capitalist system. Therefore, we will live in it for a long while. The burden of this crisis will not only have implications economically, but also it's the state's responsibility, and it's the society's responsibility. The families, the way of upbringing will have to adapt by this crisis. There's a possibility that there would be a catastrophe that will happen to this capitalist system, as happened with the COVID-19 crisis, and according to probabilities, it could happen. There's also a probability that the capitalist system will undergo through a slow expansion system or development system, but I don't think it aligns with its ideology. And there are different solutions. What nobody, I would think, would propose that this is a consumption system. It has the political, economic implications on the world level and on the South Globe countries. These countries need to rearrange or reorder its strengths. The US and Britain. In return, there's also the escalation of new powers like China, and in Latin America, in Asia, like India. So if China was able, and Mexico, to overcome these impediments, the current impediments, then it might go back to its square. There's a homogeneity of the powers internally. and I confirmed that this structural, reiterated that this internal and structural crisis will be linked to the increase in the deficit of structural systems to solve the unemployment rates, the problem, and it will be, the result will be the unsatisfaction or discontent of the citizens, which will lead to a social movement, as happened in France and the US, and like as happened in Wall Street manifestations. So this will be accompanied by the variation, pluralism, and manifestations of social disturbances. As for the South Global countries, the continuation of this crisis means that the capital systems will be less capable to provide aid, to invest in these countries, which is an important point, that the fourth industrial revolution will mean that this will affect important countries in the Middle East. This will also lead to to have less attractive capitalist model in the South Globe countries. Another point is that, my last important point, because most attendees are political scientists, in the developments of the world systems, that we will see new forces that will sit on the top of these powers, that they will be busy in their competitiveness among each other, and which will make them keen to maintain their powers without worrying about the system that they're following. Accordingly, in the near future, if we see, this is something to urge to the spread of democracy in the South Globe countries. These countries will open their markets if it's able to compete with countries. And if you've given me time, because so I know I will now finish, and thank you very much. And yes, we are sorry. So in discussion, you will clear any point you will be asked. Thank you very much for this supervisory comprehensive view of the future of the capitalism and variation that we will see. Regretfully, we don't have much time unless the organizers allow us to exceed the time. Now I've got some questions. However, I'd like I'll read some questions for posed for Rajesh Tandon, who regretfully has left this meeting. Just to one of the questions, the implications of this pandemic will be permanent, or things will go back to what it was. I think the last speech tackled this, the changes that aligned with the pandemic of the social distancing and so on. Will this develop further more? And as for the, will this social distancing continue after the end of the pandemic, and will affect the social coherence? So these were good questions. I've mentioned them, and just for further questions. So now there's a number of questions. A question to Raef Zreik. There's a question about religion. Can Can you clarify the relation of pluralism with religion, taking into consideration what's happening in Brazil and Europe? And then the relationship between democracy and religion. And can you also can it affect democracy? I will ask, and I will read the questions for you, Raef, and then you answer them. When you mentioned Arendt, that when you said that the people will go into politics should now be seen in the electoral base of Trump, which will diminish some of the pillars of the democratic system. So maybe the question should not only just in as abstract, but what is the historic circumstances that can let people become a risk on democracy under all circumstances. Zahida said, as per Arendt, freedom is linked to political liberty. But this means that those political movements which didn't have any experience before will not be able to achieve this. Wael Omar has also a question about pluralism. Can we regard pluralism or populism as a system that is able to express the interests and concerns that became illegitimate by the right and left movements? And finally, a question from Ali's Beidat. Also, it's to Raef. Is there an intersection somewhere between populism as a phenomenon that stemmed on the people's ideology and the democracy, the public democracy, or the public democracy as it is called? So up till now, these are the questions for Raef. Raef, would you like to answer?
Okay, I'll take them all together collectively. Okay, the question that we received after the following two questions are for Dr. Mustafa. And so many other questions. Okay, you take these questions, then we'll take another round. Yes, populism and religion, I really didn't think of this issue. If there is a relation between the two concepts, between religion and populism, I don't have anything significant to say. I need to consider it. Sometimes some nationalist movements provide with religious terminology and concepts, such as Zionism, one of them. The only case maybe, but you cannot understand the Irish nationalism without religion, or the Greek nationalism. But Zionism did not create this alone. There are others. But else I can't say anything more. Between democracy and populism, I started between demos and democracy. But there is something integral between both, which is returning to demos. And demos, the old demos, it was a number of men or a group of men, except the the laborers, the servants, and women. But there is something integral between demos and people and populism that is returning to all people. So there is something that is simplified, that everyone counts. All the time there is an attempt to stay away from any elitism in thought. In the last 100 years, you cannot find any philosopher who's ready to say or to undermine the idea of equality or for everyone to participate in political action. Now, George's question about the historical circumstances in America, democracy is always a threat to democracy. That is, democracy to give everything for people to decide. Maybe the people will decide to end the democratic regime. That is when democracy turns into totalitarianism. Same thing, let's say, for those who want to go to solve all the questions in one shot and to give a final answer, and so close the democratic space. Now your question, yes, it's valid. It's a valid question. It is when democracy becomes the participatory democracy that gives everyone the right to participate into politics, when it turns into a populism and a threat to democracy. It's a historical question that we don't have any answer except some answers that are momentary ones based on the history of each nation. But here, allow me to explain an idea, which is in the literatures that we try always to overcome them. The idea in defining desires and second order desires. Desire about desire. That is, I can say the following. I'd like to smoke a cigarette, but I don't want to smoke. First expression, it is an immediate desire, but I have a desire about that desire, not to smoke that desire or not to fulfill that desire, which is there is a higher self over the immediate self, not to smoke. And now, since we are dealing with democracy as some preferences that are immediate preferences, like if you go to vote, you just select a preference. Here comes the danger of populism. So all the democratic theories, they had supplements. That you don't simply go to make a preference that I like lemon ice cream, or if I put this way, I'm expressing a desire as an immediate desire. I need to have some informed decision that is based on some discussion and reconsideration for the immediate desire. And if anything to add to discussing populism now, that it is an issue that has been absented for a long period of time during the Marxist thought siege. These subjects became a sort of taboo, which is criticizing ideology. I believe you cannot reconsider and criticize populism without bringing the respect for Marx, Marcuse, and Adorno in a world where all these images are created in the media. What does it mean for people to go to elect? What is the difference between people electing? Some are electing for the vote or voting for the voice or for superstar. So the democracy is stripped of speciality when you go for a statical choice. The freedom with political action cannot achieve freedom. Arendt does not deal with politics with a tool perspective. Politics is not a tool for something beyond politics. And here comes the formalistic nature. Politics for Arendt is the practice of freedom. It's not a practice to achieve something post that or beyond that. So politics is present as art with Kant, art for art, and politics for politics. And here, Arendt faces anything that is related to Marxism that says working or activism, political activism is to solve the issue of poverty or hunger. Arendt considers that a distraction to policy. The practice of policy or politicism is that freedom. If you something else, then it's a failure. Politicism as a progressive framework is an indication to the failure to the democratic regime from achieving its promises to where our elite in the representatives represent the interests of the people they allegedly represent and govern by their name. This meeting, populism, or this side of populism could be a radical revolutionary actor because they question those who let down and they become part of oligarchy that rules its nation. And so it is not a coincidence that those who elect Trump potentially can elect Sanders, not necessarily Biden, which means that this dissatisfaction by oligarchy elite can have representation in right-wing or left-wing populism. And so there is a radical revolutionary content in populism, or let us say in some issues that populism is trying to answer or respond to. Yes, populism speaks to first order desire, appeals to them, and believes there are immediate solutions. These are my answers. I dealt with the largest number of questions. Thank you. The democracy of the general, in a way, yes. Yes, you are right. Thank you, Raef. Now, the questions, all the next questions are for Dr. Mustafa. Hamad asks, before all these change developments, are we going to witness or labor revolution that can be expansionist in facing the social and the new social and economic circumstances imposed by the capitalism? Dr. Ayman Zaro has a question. How could China balance between the socialist ideology, between the centralist system and the implementation of the capitalism system as a practical aspect? This question is not clear. What about the Arab world? Can we speak about capitalism or liberalism in light of regimes that are similar to the gang? Maybe these concepts do not apply to our Arab world. Dr. Ala Al-Azzi asked, do national wars or imperialist wars or imperialist conflict, are they among the scenarios of overcoming the new liberal capitalist crisis? There is another question from by Dr. Anya Zarab. She asks, can we describe the business practices America and Britain and the EU as new mercantile practices or new mercantilism? These are the questions.
Of course, there should be, of course, demanding revolutions in the capital countries. Of course, this is a possibility, and most probably that this crisis will go on as a structural crisis, and the growth rate will be low. And of course, will affect the incapability to provide employment, full employment. Even the transition to a certain revolution will lead to the dismantle of some industries, which is called like a structural unemployment. Also the inability to move to the model of the prosperous country, which means that the basic services of citizens will be difficult to obtain. And of course, and this means in the US, as happened, and in Britain, in France, and in Italy, this is what happens. Accordingly, these countries will never get out of the democratic system in its liberal picture. Therefore, the citizens have the chance to express their positions, and the freedom is there in these countries. But however, mostly these demands will never, or this defending movement will never be out of the unions or from the movements, but it will come from new movements, new erupted movements created by the civil society. So it will not be linked to the political, conventional or traditional political movements or labor unions. So my perspective about this is that one of the implications is the continuation of the economic, social problems, and so these we cannot not even revolutions as much as there are oppositions. So there's no chance for an alternative, a clear alternative of the capitalist system. Even when Billy Sanders in the US, when he talks about communism, democratic communism, that is something that is clear, very clear to what is happening in in Europe. Communism means ownerships, private ownership, and so this is not proposed. Therefore, these oppositions demand a change in the economic and social policies. As for China, well, Chinese, they call their communism as in a Chinese way, Chinese characteristics. So so it's to gather all these contradictions. So this is called communism in a Chinese characteristic or Chinese way. So when we check the list of 500 richest Chinese people, some of them are people in the world. Most of them are Chinese, but not Chinese from China, maybe from Hong Kong or so on. So this is communism in a Chinese way. There are many aspects that are that could be contradictory, like the Chinese model. And what's also strange in the Chinese model is to gather between the capitalist sector and the dominancy of the Chinese party. As happens in the National People's Congress in the Chinese Parliament, which is not really very does not have much weight. However, maybe we can give some appreciation to Huntington when he divides the world into cultures, and where he says that in East Asia countries there's a bigger priority for stability, accumulative equality, and less interest of freedoms. In the China case, there could be a keenness about the system, about stability, and the less interest about political freedoms. So all these movements have come that are formed of artists and others. We don't know much about them, but we know that in South Korea, that is a role in economic growth that is monopolized by the state. This have led to some Korea was transformed from a military system to a civil system, and which is supported by the opposing parties, and it's supported by the by big private sector. So, and it's very loyal. The capitalist system is very loyal to the state system. China has taken a move from the centralized planning to other types of planning, which are very flexible, and where it sets clear goals, but does not imply how it will implement these goals. So China is a miracle by itself. However, this Chinese geniusness is together between two contradictions. As for the Arab world is you're correct in what you said, that these concepts do not imply. We still maintain our privacy and particularity. I've supervised some studies related to an meeting. So people object on all terminologies and terminology of development, human development. So this concept means that we expand the options before the citizens. So the Arab concept and understanding of development is has particularity, and we're always whatever prevails around the world does not necessarily prevail in the Arab context. When we say that to call for democracy will not be presented. Therefore, the patriarchal systems in the Arab world will prosper, and I believe that they will present any pressure on countries like Egypt and the Saudi and other countries. So the problem in the Arab world is, on the one hand, there is less demand for petrol because of the recession, because of the economic situation, and because of the transformation to this industrial, the fourth industrial revolution, and shortage of petroleum and less of shortage of aids or lack of aid to the Arab countries that is affected by the capitalism system. So we don't have laws and legislation that we follow. It's that history that makes humans and human. It's not by option, but it's at the end the man-made thing. So, and their neighbors might not be happy about these the systems in the Arab world. So it's difficult. Sometimes you need to find solutions for this. As for the imperialism question, this is an important question. I see that there's a type of disparity or conflict between the elite controlling or authority and an economic elites. In the globalization system, there's interest for big companies. However, the government will take a stand in this regard. In the US, they take opposing stand, like American companies, they do benefit from globalization. It does not seem like they pressure on the American forces to stop its expansion. So until when these companies, and there was a discussion about if we were witnessing transnationalization or globalization. So, which means do these companies have a vision that is international or cross-national, or it sticks to its nationalism? So there's a disparity in the interests, the interests of the companies and the globalization, and the interests of the governments. So, and it has some negative implications on the citizens. However, the result will not be as a push towards so this interdependence level is very high between China and the US. Therefore, this will lead to a stress. And it's basically between China and the US. So this interdependence, this high interdependence of all these capital economies will make it difficult to go into war. The last question. Well, about mercantilism, it's protective measures and or policies, which means to mitigate resources, limit resources. And will this limitation or this policy that is issued means that mostly it will affect the internal market more than the expanded markets. This, accordingly, we cannot say that the policies of the US and Europe are closer. The state that follows these mercantile policies are China and US, because they export largely to other countries of the world. And there was a new mercantilism. It's in China and not the US and not Europe as well. So Europe is keen to preserve its status, much less than the US. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And now there's this question, one question to you, and then another question to Raef, and we will end here. The question to you from Shada Hamad. There is an increase in the interest of energy, and the deal of the century is based on energy between the Israel and the Arab countries. How do you see this in the new capitalist changes, and what is the risk of this? So can you please answer it in brief? I don't see any relation. So nothing was started. So I think power or energy means okay, or Egypt.
Palestine, the developments that we witness is not just because of the energy or the deal of the century, but it is what the rulers of the Gulf see. And the UAE alleged that Netanyahu was not about to implement the annexation. And there was a reservation from the United States of America. But it said, I think the real reason for Bahrain and fear from Iran. So the US is exercising pressure on them, such as lifting sanctions on Sudan and so forth. So I don't see any connection between the conflict over or the struggle over energy and the deal of the century. Thank you. There is a question for you from Ala Al-Azze, saying that your final sentence about the relation between nationalism and national status that is dealing with the capitalism as one block, universal block. But how do you explain the conflict between the capitalist elite in different countries, America as a model, and capitalism on nationalist movements? Right. Can you just simply repeat the question, please? There is something that I didn't get in your question. It says, in your final sentence about the relation between capitalism and the social status, it is dealt, there is a dealing with the capitalist as one universal bloc. But how do you explain the conflict between the capitalist elite within the states, America as an example, or between capitalism on nationalist grounds? Conflict between capitalists, yes, there is a conflict there, but there is no conflict among them over capitalism, as there is conflict between Zionism, or within them over Zionism. Capitalism is the land where they have a conflict. Capitalists are in disagreement over different issues. Maybe the best thing to explain what I meant with the summary that I saw as a model over Israel, but maybe it should or it can be generalized and historically and economically diagnosed approach. I try to say that at a given point of time, Israel model, the Zionist elites are the ones who created borders for the people and melting pot and the language and the market. That is nationalism as a framework is imposed top to down because there is an interest for creating the market and the labor market so that for the elite to abuse or use their people, and there is a need for framing and making borders. And in a world where borders are opening and the movement of international capitalist movement is crossing the borders and moving that way. Today you can get a job in Vienna, tomorrow in Geneva and elsewhere. This is an example of professional elite. This turns borders into something that limits or restricts the elite, so their will or wish to preserve the borders remains limited. Now, the forces that are interested in drawing the borders in two meanings. First, to prevent the foreigners' entry and to prevent imports are the medium or the downtrodden classes. So there is a reproduction by nationalism because that's all what is left for them as a form of social solidarity and a way from bottom up to check the classes and the elite. And a moral capitalist. So Zionism is the moral capital, whereas there is a middle class Palestinian class within Israel that is growing. So the more the Jew worker in Dimona gets the Jewish state that does not provide economic equality, but provides them a status as if it is a Jewish state. I don't know if I answered, but I tried to answer what I meant by all of that. Okay, I'm done. Thank you. Okay, questions are over, and the time, we are late a little. Thank you for your participation. I remind you with the third session today for this conference at 5 o'clock, Jerusalem time. We have a session which is current requirements for exiting the crisis. I understood now through a message the session has a different name, Depth of the Crisis, by Dr. Haytham and Reem. These are the chains. Fine. Thank you. Thanks, brother. Have a nice afternoon. Thank you.